Hello bat specialists and hot topic enthusiasts, Aaron here, back with another video. Ororon is the first ever tall male Electro unit to be added into the game, and potentially the last male to be released from Natlan. This has led to quite a bit of clamor. Is he really the last husbando that we can get for almost a year? Is he even good? What do you need to do to get the most out of him? Did he buy those jeans pre-ripped, or did he rip them himself? Before I answer those questions and more, I just have to say that if you do like my content, why not take a bite out of that Mazamora Morada flavored subscribe button down below. With that done, let's echolocate our way toward Ororon's overview. Ororon is a sub-DPS buffing support hybrid that focuses on the electrocharged reaction to do said damage and buffing. Ororon's skill has him throw a little orb at an enemy that deals electro damage and generates 3 electro particles once per 4 seconds. If there is another enemy nearby, this orb will bounce to that enemy, dealing damage. This orb can bounce up to 3 times, but only once per enemy target. Ororon's elemental burst is his main focus, as it deals a burst of damage on cast and then summons a fidget spinner in front of him. And no, really, it's just a glorified fidget spinner. This fidget spinner will taunt nearby enemies and continuously fire off Night Soul aligned electro damage in 3 directions as it rotates for 9 seconds. Ororon's Ascension 1 passive grants him 40 Night Soul points when Night Soul burst is triggered. For 15 seconds after using his elemental skill, Ororon will gain an additional 5 Night Soul points, up to a maximum gain of 50 Night Soul points when nearby active characters trigger electro or hydro damage. Also, if Ororon has 10 or more Night Soul points, he will consume 10 Night Soul points whenever an enemy takes electro charged or Night Soul aligned damage. When this occurs, he will enter the Night Soul state for 6 seconds, and he will trigger Hypersense, which deals Night Soul aligned electro damage to up to 4 nearby enemies once per 1.8 seconds. Ororon's Ascension 4 passive enables Ororon to generate 3 energy for himself, his on-field party member, for 15 seconds for using his skill, but only when the on-field party member deals electro or hydro damage. This can occur up to 3 times for each duration for a total of 9 energy. Ororon's talent priority is pretty straightforward. Most of his damage comes from electro charged, his Ascension passive, and his elemental burst. Only his burst can be leveled, so that's first. His skill and normal attacks, though, can be skipped since they deal almost no damage, but if you do want a priority for these two, then focus on his skill first. But trust me, putting anything into each of these things is truly just a waste of resources. Ororon's combos are just like every other off-field DPS, just skill and burst and then swap, short and sweet. Ororon's constellations are also pretty straightforward, as they all increase his personal damage, but in different ways. Ororon's first constellation increases the maximum number of bounces that his skill has from 3 to 5. Additionally, after the fidget spinner he summons from his elemental burst hits opponents, they will be marked. Enemies marked in this way increase the damage that his Ascension 1 passive deals to them by 50%. The extra 2 bounces from his skill effectively leads to 2 extra activations of electrocharged when up against 5 or more enemies, and that's it. 50% damage bonus ends up buffing his main raw damage source by a large amount. Around 75% of his total damage output comes from electrocharged, which does not have to do with damage percent. This leads to a rather low damage increase overall, which is not that great. Ororon's second constellation grants him an 8% electro damage bonus after using his elemental burst, and each hit of his elemental burst would grant him an additional 8% electro damage bonus, stacking up to 40%. This is just like his last constellation, but for all of his damage. However, it has the same issue as his first constellation, since it does not off electrocharge damage output to an overall rather low damage increase. Ororon's third constellation increases his elemental burst level by 3. This is where a good portion of his raw damage output comes from, but still, most of his damage is dealt through electrocharged and not his raw damage. Ororon's fourth constellation increases the rotation speed of Ororon's elemental burst's fidget spinner by 25%. This is good, but it does not offer enough of an increase in rotation speed to matter for triggering more reactions, and it offers a small damage increase to his elemental burst, making it rather underwhelming. Ororon's fifth constellation increases his elemental skill level by 3. However, his skill offered nothing of value before other than electro application and energy, and that has not changed. Ororon's sixth constellation grants the current active party member 10% up to 30% attack for 9 seconds after the damage from his Ascension 1 passive is triggered. Additionally, after activating his elemental burst, his Ascension 1 passive's damage will be triggered 1 time, dealing 200% of his original damage. Because his burst triggers his Ascension 1 passive instantly, it will grant Ororon a 10% attack increase. On top of that, it will grant the on-field party member 30% attack bonus. This increase puts his buffs on par with the Viridescent Venrir set for any attack scaling on-field party member, while also buffing his own damage output and that of his teammates. Because his on-field buff buff is tied to his fast triggering Ascension 1 passive, he could potentially buff his off-field party members too. This constellation is very good for this one specific reason. It's what puts him in place as the best electrocharged support in the game. Ororon has some pretty underwhelming constellations, which is a good thing considering he's a 4-star. His first two largely amplify his damage output, and his final constellation grants a good buff to the on-field party member, but his others are essentially useless. Due to his ability to build into full elemental mastery in AoE situations, two can also be pretty underwhelming upgrades, meaning that his only consistently effective constellation is a 30% attack buff he can grant allies from his 6th. Even then, this buff is not useful in many situations since a good portion of main DPS units that he works well with will not have a massive reliance on attack for damage. So while his constellations may be decent sometimes, he really does not need them to be useful. But now with Ororon's base kit over and done with, let's move on to how to build this baddie boy, starting with artifacts. Ororon's best in slot artifact option is the Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City set. This is not only because it offers Ororon and his team a large 40% damage bonus, but it's specifically because of the 2 pieces energy regeneration passive effect. This 2-piece effect is so valuable because it drastically reduces the energy he needs. That on top of his already built-in flat energy generation passive can grant Ororon almost a 30 cost elemental burst. These bounces make it his best in slot set even when he's paired alongside another Natling unit who would also want this set. This set is so good for him that there's pretty much no point in farming for anything else. Now before I move on to stat priority, I want to mention Ororon's 2 different builds, his raw damage build and his elemental mastery build, which became relevant with the new buffs to electrocharged that increased its damage by 66%. The key distinction between each build is ease of building and consistency. Ororon's DPS build offers a lower damage ceiling and is harder to build than his elemental mastery build. However, it is much more consistent because it relies on his raw damage instead of teammates. Ororon's elemental mastery build can be incredibly inconsistent because it requires fast hydro application at a base level. On top of that, if another unit is in the party that also has electro application, then Ororon will not have priority over every single electrocharged trigger, lowering the effectiveness of elemental mastery even further. However, if there is enough hydro application and if against multiple enemies, the DPS Ororon can output with a full elemental mastery build is ludicrous. But again, this will not always be the case. Ororon's teams would usually want an Animo unit to group and apply Viridescent Van Veer, and this Animo unit would share some of the electrocharged triggers, making his pure damage build my recommended one. But do still keep in mind that his elemental mastery build is a strong alternative, especially when he's at lower constellation levels, since he'd be lacking most of his raw damage. When it comes to main stats, I recommend going the normal attack percent, damage percent, and crit. However, you can also use an attack percent goblet since he already gets an absolutely absurd 130% damage bonus from his first constellation, second constellation, and the scroll artifact set. Another option for the Sands is an elemental mastery one since he would still be dealing a lot of damage from electrocharged. Usually, you will want to balance these stats out in his substats, but if not using an elemental mastery weapon, using an elemental mastery Sands could be a good idea. If going for a full elemental mastery build, going for triple elemental mastery on the main stats would be best. For his substats, Ororon relies on his elemental burst for a good portion of his usability, so energy recharge is incredibly important for him. In situations where he's without another electro unit, this amount can go up to 175%, but in situations where he is paired with an electro unit, this amount would be reduced to 135% or less. Additionally, each Favonius weapon in the team would further reduce his energy requirements by about 15% energy recharge, so as long as you run one of the most overpowered weapon series on your other 2 supports, you can see a reduction of up to 30% energy recharge for his requirements. With that in mind, I recommend you aim up to 145% maximum. If you're struggling with that, use your other units to help generate energy for the team. Then you'll want to aim for a decent crit ratio of 60 to 120 or higher depending on the weapon. Then you're looking for an attack of 1750 at the minimum, but it should be higher. Also try to get some elemental mastery. 80 should be enough as a base, but like his other damaging stats, it should be higher. In terms of weapon options, it kind of depends, but generally his best will be Elegy for the End. Elegy for the End is Ororon's best in slot weapon, mainly because it offers him enough energy recharge to reach any energy recharge requirement he may have. It offers him enough attack to reach and surpass any threshold he might want, and it offers him 100 elemental mastery to help him reach any elemental mastery requirement he might have. On top of that, this weapon grants these attack and elemental mastery buffs to the entire team, increasing the raw damage and reaction damage even further. This weapon is so overpowered for Ororon one that, if you do want to main him, then you should definitely pick it up. Polar Star is up next, as it increases the user's crit rate by 33.1%, it increases the user's elemental skill and burst damage by 12%, and it also has the potential to increase the user's attack by up to 48%. These stats are huge, as the massive attack buff helps enable Ororon's raw damage potential, while the crit makes his damage more consistent. The only downside to this bow is that it requires weaving a normal and charge attack into every single rotation, making it kind of awkward to use and potentially reducing its overall damage output. The next few bows are all 5-star crit stat sticks, so I will be going over them pretty swiftly. Thundering Pulse is first due to its balance of large amounts of attack and crit. Aqua Simulacra is behind because it lacks attack percent, which Ororon really needs for his personal damage. Despite that, the huge crit stack and extra damage percent stat help push it above others. First Great Magic is another strong stat stick for Ororon, but it will usually be under Thundering Pulse since it offers the same base stats. The extra attack percent buff this weapon offers requires other Electro units. There are pros and cons to this, but generally it will not always be the best to have this weapon. Hunter's Path is also good specifically for the massive crit stat, but it has nothing else, which puts it lower than the better attack stat stick weapons. Chainbreaker is the first 4-star bow of note, as it offers a large base attack with 66% attack and a good 48 elemental mastery. This is a huge amount of stats that enables Ororon to only have to worry about the essentials. This weapon is so good for Ororon that it could even rival the Elegy for the End and the Polar Star at max stacks in terms of damage. The main reason it's up so high though is because it allows him to flex into both a raw damage build or a full elemental mastery build for damage, making it one of the best all-purpose bows he has available. Going back to 5-star stat sticks, we have Chaska's signature bow. This weapon has the same base stats as Thundering Pulse and First Great Magic, but it offers him no potential attack stat. This pushes this weapon into 4-star territory despite the extra damage percent buff. Skyward Harp is also good due to the large crit value and base attack, but that's kind of it, and he wants more. And finally, there's the Stringless Bow, which is amazing for Ororon because of the large elemental mastery bonus it grants, plus the strong 48% elemental skill and elemental burst damage bonus. This is strong, but Ororon already has an insane amount of damage bonus in his base kit, and most of his damage comes from his Ascension 1 passive, which doesn't get buffed by this weapon. Despite that, it's still incredibly powerful for Ororon, especially when used for his personal damage build. With that done, let's move on to the synergies that Ororon has. One unit that Ororon works very well alongside is Tartaglia. Tartag is one of the best hydro applicators in the game, since when he is on field, he has the fastest hydro application of any character. This is amplified when he's used in AoE situations due to his quadratic scaling. Ororon and Electrocharged itself also tend to work best alongside AoE content, and Electrocharged needs a lot of hydro application to stay active, which Tartag has. Tartaglia also just happens to be one of the only hydro applicators in the game that scale off of only attack. All of these things combined means that Tartaglia is pretty much the only hydro character in the game that gets the full benefit from Ororon's kit. This leads to a crazy powerful synergy between the two, to the point that they will be a core in some of the best Electrocharge teams in the game. Chaska is another unit that works incredibly with Ororon because of her ability to apply more hydro to enemies due to Swirl, and her ability to infuse her bullets with hydro. This makes her one of the better main DPS hydro applicators in the game, despite her not being of the hydro element. Ororon can also buff her attack percent, and he can buff the damage percent of the elements she has infused herself with. This leads to an overall very powerful back and forth between these two characters, as they end up benefiting from each other. Well, for team options, Ororon's best in slot comp is his signature Electrocharge focused teams. Here, he's best when paired with heavy hydro application, though he can trigger Electrocharge rapidly while off-field. Teammates like Chaska and Tartaglia work best here due to this application and attack scaling, alongside units like Kazuha, Irina, Venti, and Okami. Single target hydro applicators can also work, but they will only perform better when against a single enemy. A variant of Electrocharged would include Hyperbloom. However, only a weaker Dendro applicator would work here because the Dendro aura is stronger than a Hydro aura. This Dendro aura would remove Ororon's ability to deal damage almost altogether, so units like Yao Yao, Kirara, and Baiju would usually be best for this occasional pinch of Dendro application. Other than that swap, the rest of the team would consist of the same type of teammates. Now, with almost everything said and done, let's finish off the video with Ororon's rating. Ororon's own damage output is pretty high. When considering only his raw damage output, Ororon would lead more toward a 3 out of 5 for sub DPS. What really puts him above and beyond is the Electrocharge reaction, as the buff to its damage increases his damage by a whole 2 rating values. This would lead Ororon to a 4 out of 5 on average for damage output. Ororon's application is also also incredibly good, especially against AoE content. This is because his fidget spinner attracts enemies toward its center, and because his Ascension passive damage does not have an elemental ICD. However, it does have a harsh limit of 4 enemies, earning him a 4.5. In terms of offensive utility, he has a 40% damage bonus for the team, and he can provide a 30% attack buff to the on-field party member. This attack buff can also be passed along to other off-field party members, but it would be rare for it to happen or for it to be beneficial, earning him a good 3 out of 5. In terms of battery potential, Ororon's is not the best. Sure, he can generate 4 electro particles, but it has a 4-second cooldown, which means he cannot abuse elemental skill cooldown resets or elemental skill cooldown reductions. However, he can generate 9 energy to the on-field unit and about 15 energy for himself. This is pretty good for himself, but not that great for his team, earning him an okay 2 out of 5. In terms of defensive utility, he has a taunt. This can draw enemy aggro away from allies, but it's pretty finicky and won't always work super correctly, earning him a 0.5 out of 5. In terms of flexibility and versatility, Ororon can act as both the sub DPS and the buffing support for the team. However, the teams he can act in are only electrocharge focused ones, else his power level would plummet. This limitation earns him merely a 1 out of 5 for flexibility and versatility. Overall, Ororon is a very powerful support unit deserving of a 3.5 out of 5 rating. His buffs are strong, his application is stronger, and his damage can be huge. However, he is very limited in his usability. While this might not be a major factor for some, most enjoy a unit that can work in multiple teams. Ororon is not that kind of gal. He needs electrocharge to function, and adding in other elements can screw with the electro application, so he can only be paired with hydro, electro, and animo units, or those that don't have an abundance of elemental application. This is his weakest point, but he provides a large amount of everything else needed toward clearing endgame content as an electrocharge focused support. But that's all I have to say about Ororon. Now I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think of Ororon? How do you plan to use him? Do you plan to use an elemental mastery build, full damage build, or a mixture? Did you buy your genes pre-ripped, or did you rip them yourself? Tell me what's up down below. But with that, I will skedaddle. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye!